right now, it is time for the football show.
The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then. What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
You're very welcome along to Thursday's football show. Nathan with you for the next hour. We have got a huge few days of live football coming your way. Manchester City against Liverpool, live from the Etihad Stadium and Off the Ball on Sunday. Stephen Doyle and Brian Kerr will bring you through that one. And then next Tuesday we're going to bring you live commentary of the Republic of Ireland's World Cup qualifier against Sweden in Gothenburg. It'll be from 5:30. It'll be live on OTB Sports Radio, so you can listen in online to that. Sweden, by the way, warmed up for that game with a 15-0 victory against Georgia in their qualifier tonight. You might remember the Republic of Ireland beat Georgia 11-0 at the end of last year, so very much the weakest team in that group, but a nice little warm-up match for Sweden ahead of the visit of the Republic of Ireland. There is a lot of live football on tonight in the Europa League and the Conference League, and Rangers have just gone behind in their Europa League quarter-final against Braga, 1-0 to the Portuguese side. Still scoreless between West Ham and Lyon, second half just getting underway, but Aaron Cresswell sent off just before half-time for West Ham in that one. Eintracht Frankfurt have taken a 1-0 lead against Barcelona, while it finished 1-1 between Leipzig and Atalanta in the early game. While in the Europa Conference League quarter-finals, scoreless between Leicester City and PSV Eindhoven. Marseille 2-0 up against PAOK, a stunning strike from Dimitri Payet that I'd recommend you checking out. Bodo Glimt trailing Jose Mourinho's Roma by a 1-0, and earlier finished 3-3 between Feyenoord and Slavia Prague. A reminder that we're back as well tomorrow night, 10 o'clock, for our League of Ireland late night on Twitter Spaces. We'll be reflecting on a huge night in the League of Ireland. Shamrock Rovers are going to Shells, while it's the Stephen O'Donnell derby, Dundalk against St. Pat's tomorrow night, so there'll be plenty to reflect on with myself, Johnny and Shane. But right now I want to talk about Karim Benzema in a moment, but first we want to talk about Manchester City and the developments today. The football writer Philippe Auclair is on the line. Good evening, Philippe.
Good evening to you.
We had wanted to get you on to talk about the greatness of Karim Benzema, but
yes.
News has developed quickly over the last few hours, and Der Spiegel, the German newspaper, at the centre of it, with revelations around Manchester City and the investigations that have been going on into the club for the last 3 years around inflated sponsorship deals, with the connections with the ownership in Abu Dhabi, hidden salary payments made to a former manager, illegal payments for underage players. Could you talk us through exactly what's been revealed today?
Oh my goodness. Yes, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to ask me. I've spent most of the day actually poring over the documents which have been published on by Der Spiegel, because the important thing, I suppose, about what they have put out this afternoon is not just the alleged facts, but it's also all the documentation and the context, which was missing until now. And I think many of the people who will be aware of the reasons why Manchester City were actually banned for 2 years by UEFA in February 2020, before this sanction was overturned by CAS in July of the same year, will have an idea what we're talking about. We're talking about and we've got to be careful here, obviously. I know the Irish libel laws are pretty strict. But we're talking about allegations of having, for example, Roberto Mancini's salary paid in part by a fictitious contract with Al Jazeera, which happens to be the national broadcaster there. We're talking about youth players, actually Brahim Diaz and Jadon Sancho, being pressured into signing deals with Manchester City by financial inducement, which of course is totally illegal given the age at which those players were allegedly approached. We have to be sure of mentioning that. We're talking about a number of payments to agents and which were going through intermediaries who probably shouldn't have been used or shouldn't be used. We're talking about payments by sponsors which were in fact only paid in part by the sponsors being, again, allegedly being given that money by the club itself, which is quite an extraordinary thing when you think about it. But the idea being, of course, that what this would enable to do would be to circumvent financial fair play regulations, which of course limited the amount of money that the owners could put in their own clubs. So what you do is that you give money to a sponsor, and the sponsor gives you the money back, but to the club itself. Again, these are all things which are not have been discussed before. The difference here is that we have a lot of documents to corroborate the allegations which have been put forward by Der Spiegel. And I think one of the most serious things, as far, as somebody who's been following this story quite closely for a while now, I think one of the most serious things in this is that when the Court of Arbitration for Sport decided to give the verdict to Manchester City back in July 2020, as in to overturn the 2-year ban which had been imposed by UEFA, one of the reasons was that they were struck by the testimony of some of the Manchester City executives who went to the tribunal and swore that none of this had happened. And there is one particular instance, and perhaps you'll excuse me for not going into the particulars of this one, because I think it's actually a very important legal point, and which might be of even greater importance in the days and the weeks to come. It seems that there is at least elements to believe that this particular executive was not exactly telling the truth. And if that is the case, that would be very serious indeed, because that would be a matter that would probably force, normally would bring, would make CAS and UEFA go back to the case and say, hold on, this was not done properly. Now, of course, the other thing as well is that for 3 years and 3 months now, there is an investigation which has been ongoing by the Premier League. Very difficult to get details about it because it is a so-called confidential matter. So it's very difficult to understand exactly what they're investigating, but which is also centered on Manchester City. And without giving away too much detail again, what I've alluded to beforehand is probably what the Premier League is looking at as well. Now, the Premier League is going to come under scrutiny and under a great deal of pressure now that this dossier has been published to actually tell us what exactly they're doing and what they're investigating, and are they going to come to some conclusions at some point? And should Manchester City be found to be have been to be an infringement of Premier League rules, would they act, and how would they act? So all of this suddenly has brought back a dossier which we thought had been set aside about a year and a half ago now, has brought it back to the front pages. And what we've got to wait for now is a reaction from UEFA, from the Premier League, and especially from the club itself, and also from the various companies and government agencies from Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates, which have been quoted in the Spiegel dossier, and which apparently none of them have actually reacted or given a response or reply to the German magazine. It's one way of going on about it, I suppose. But there, I think, I hope I haven't completely drowned yourself and your listeners into too much detail. But that's basically the root of the dossier is all about circumventing financial fair play regulations by using sponsors and by using state aid disguised as sponsor money and the rest of it, which all I have said, and which of course are very, very serious allegations.
Absolutely. And listen, I think you've described it brilliantly there, Philippe, and the detail is absolutely crucial. And in terms of its importance, you talk about like illegal payments for underage players is one of the accusations. Like, they wouldn't be the first club to be accused of such things, and inflated sponsorship deals and hidden salary payments would feed into a belief that a lot of people have had around Manchester City have been essentially a state-run club. When you look at their various sponsorship deals they have around their jersey and their stadium and the links that are there with Abu Dhabi, is it the revelation here then that actually there is now, allegedly, according to Der Spiegel, there is written proof for allegations that have long been denied for CAS, for UEFA, and presumably, as you say, with this Premier League investigation, that now there is a proof of what Manchester City have long denied, and they're now potentially going to have to deal with the consequences. I say potentially because, well, who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? It's a little bit more complicated than that. The fact is, when you have a club which is owned, or which was owned until very recently when it was switched to another company, but it's basically the same ownership, by an investment fund, this investment fund is headed by the deputy prime minister of the United Arab Emirates, who is also the half-brother of the president of the United Arab Emirates, and the son-in-law as well of the Emir of Dubai, if I'm not mistaken. And you put all that together and you add the fact that the money that has been invested in there is basically Emirati money, and you look at the number of positions that the people who are at Manchester City also have with the United Arab Emirates government and authorities, and you think, well, it's obvious, it screams at you, this is owned by the UAE. But Manchester City has always denied that was the case, and always said that it was a private property, that it was a private investment by Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed, and it had nothing to do with the authorities. Now, one of the things that the Spiegel asserts is that there was at least one case, in fact several, in which payments were actually made, but only after they had been authorized by a government agency. And they said they used quite an interesting simile here. They said it's a bit, imagine like Deutsche Bahn, which is basically the German national railway, were the sponsor of Bayern Munich and had a sponsorship agreement with Bayern. And imagine then that Bayern would have to go to the Chancellor's office to make sure the money was coming. You would think that's a little bit strange, isn't it? And that's exactly what happened in this particular case, according to Der Spiegel. So I don't think we have a definite proof of the ownership of the club by the state. What we have is yet more circumstantial evidence that indeed there is control of that club by the Emirati government and royal family. And I will leave it at that, because you could say it was the same thing. I would say it's not quite the same thing, but I think we all know what we're talking about. This is a club which is basically, yes, controlled by a nation state. I mean, in a different, perhaps not as direct a way as, for example, PSG is controlled by Qatar, because PSG is controlled by QSI, which is a sports investment of the Qatari nation, the same way that Newcastle United is owned 80% by PIF, which is a sovereign fund which only happens to be to have Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, as president. So it's not quite as direct as that, but there are loads of elements in what Der Spiegel has been publishing today, which seem to confirm what I think we've all thought from the very beginning, as it is a state project.
It does feel as though that Manchester City, with all the success that they are having on the field, and maybe this will finally be the year that Pep Guardiola sees them over the line in the Champions League, that they've almost got to a stage where they're too big to fail. And in terms of potential consequences for this, and what the Premier League, what UEFA, what the Court of Arbitration for Sport might do, that you've covered this sport, and we've had so many of these conversations around so many different areas, clubs. Like, do you see any potential serious consequence coming down the line that will affect Manchester City on the pitch in any way?
I would be very interested to see what the reaction within the Premier League is going to be. And I'm thinking that Manchester City doesn't have, the Premier League is a limited company which has got 21 shareholders, the 20 clubs which happen to be in the Premier League at that particular time, plus the FA, but the FA is more kind of a regulatory body when it comes to the format of competitions and fairness of competition and so forth. But of those 20 shareholders of the Premier League today, when they read or they will read what the Spiegel published today, I think there was quite a few who might think, you know what, I'm not happy with that. I don't think that's fair. And whether they decide to act upon it and to put pressure within the Premier League for the Premier League to actually do something about it or not, that's entirely up to them. But it's true that, as far as UEFA is concerned, you've seen that the financial fair play rules have been basically erased and wiped off the blackboard and replaced by a new set of rules which are all about balancing the accounts, which is quite a different thing altogether. I'm not too sure that UEFA would want to revisit a case in which, to be honest, they didn't cover themselves with glory, because a lot of what they were asserting to start with, I think, were things which probably could be defended in front of a court. Unfortunately, they'd forgotten about something, which is the fact that it was too late. And there was the statute of limitations on some of the alleged offences, and which is why Manchester City got away with it. So I'm not holding my breath. I'm interested to see in what the Premier League is going to do, if it's going to do anything at long last. I repeat myself, but the investigation into Manchester City by the Premier League was started in December 2018. That's a long time ago, and nothing has come out of it yet, which is quite extraordinary.
Well, that in itself is extraordinary. That any investigation for such a company and a league that's under the spotlight, that, as you said, there's been little or no leaks, there's been no revelations, nobody seems to know where that investigation stands.
Yeah. And the fact is that one thing we can say, which is a fact, is that Manchester City has not exactly been forthright in cooperating with the investigators, be it the investigators from UEFA or the investigators from the Premier League. That's what I hear. And certainly they haven't been very cooperative when it comes to Der Spiegel, because they have refused to answer all the questions that the Spiegel put to them. So, draw your own conclusions from that, if you want to draw them. The other thing as well, and I just want to come back quickly on that, when you were talking about the sponsorship of Manchester City. One thing which I find extraordinary is that we're still going through a pandemic, but we went through very severe lockdowns in Western Europe. And it so happens that Manchester City, of all the clubs in Europe, and probably all the clubs on the planet, managed to increase their income during the pandemic, and in particular by securing amazing commercial rights during a time in which nobody was spending any money. And when you look at the contracts they signed, it's quite extraordinary, because some of them are with the Abu Dhabi Travel Authority, in a pandemic. That's pretty interesting. Another one was with a luxury hotel in the Gulf as well, at the time when people couldn't actually travel or stay in a hotel. And they still managed to bring in more money through commercial interests and partnerships than anybody else on the planet, including Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester United. And because of that, they were put at number one in the rich list published by the accounting cabinet, Deloitte. And which, was a bit surprising. How do you manage to do that? When you look at the list of sponsors, most of them, or a great number of them, come from the region. They come from the United Arab Emirates, they come from Abu Dhabi, they come from Dubai. So you think, okay. And then you read this and you think, okay. So is it a level playing field?
Well,
no,
I think
it's not.
You just need to visit the Etihad Stadium and compare it to a trip to Anfield or Old Trafford or any of those stadiums, and it's a very different scene.
Certainly, yes.
For some of those companies to be investing in. We've only a couple of minutes left. We had, when we were initially making the call, the intention was to talk about Karim Benzema after his hat-trick. We don't have a huge amount of time. You've obviously been following his career from, I saw Miguel Delaney put it into sort of three different spells, from being the wonder kid, then the guy who had to play second fiddle to Cristiano Ronaldo, to now becoming very much the superstar in his own right.
Yeah.
And the debate that's been going on about the sudden improvement in Karim Benzema. When you were watching Benzema during the Ronaldo years, was it a Benzema who was constantly sacrificing himself for the team, or is there a maturity to his play that has allowed him to become a better player now than he was 7-8 years ago?
He's a better player now than he was, and he's actually one of the very best players on the planet now. But I think that we tend to exaggerate the extent to which he put himself in Ronaldo's shadow. He's a proper football player, which means he's a collective player, which means that if he's got an absolutely astonishing goal scorer by his side, he will, of course, make sure that he does everything to make him shine. But if you look at his numbers at the time when Ronaldo was there, he's had actually some of his best seasons. I mean, I think his second best season after this one at Real Madrid was back in 2011-2012, where he scored 32 goals in 52 games. Excuse me, that's not exactly rubbish. And in fact, his numbers have always been exceptionally high. I think it's just because he was next to one of the great goal scorers perhaps the great goal scorer of our age. Because of that, his contribution was perhaps not seen for what it was. Perhaps people didn't quite appreciate how complete a player he was, the intelligence of the player, the fact he can score left foot, right foot, header, heavens above those headers against Chelsea. They were amazing. And also great passer of the ball, somebody who knows how to pace himself, etc., etc., etc. I think the one thing about Karim Benzema that people should realize is the absolute consistency of his output ever since he broke into Lyon, into the first side, in the first 11, which was 2006, but mostly the 2007-8 season when he started to play so regularly. Actually, he was one of the pillars of that particular team. And since then, he's basically been scoring 20 to 30 goals a season, almost all of the time. We're talking about a true great. He's not the kind of personality, obviously, that people would associate perhaps with a truly great player. He's also had his moments of shade, even darkness. We shouldn't forget that he was recently sentenced to a year, 1 year suspended and pretty hefty fine for his role in the infamous Mathieu Valbuena sex tape affair. But there is an appeal. He appealed against this sentence, an appeal which is going to be heard at the end of June. But there have been moments when, you could ask yourself, maybe that also, is sun and shade. But the sun is shining more brightly now than it ever has. And he is perhaps France's greatest ever number 9. And I'm serious when I say that. Proper number 9. Because Thierry Henry was not a genuine number 9. There was Just Fontaine, but whose career was cut short when he was still quite young. And you look, there's Jean-Pierre Papin, but Benzema is better. Kylian Mbappe is not really a number 9. I mean, he's everything, but he's really not a number 9. And so I think Karim Benzema has got a good shout for him being perhaps, yes, the greatest proper centre-forward that France has ever had. And that is saying something. I mean, what an absolutely amazing player. Absolutely amazing.
Benzema has been talking about Mbappe over the past couple of weeks and the potential of a move. From what you know, a 10, 12-year-old Kylian Mbappe watching Karim Benzema play for Real Madrid and La Liga and in big European games, was Benzema an influence on a young Mbappe?
I don't know if he was an influence. I think he would have been one of the players he was looking up to. And I think the prospect of seeing those two together, not forgetting Vinicius, who is not exactly a poor player, and a few others, is frightening and beautiful at the same time. To be honest, there is still a part of me who would love to see Kylian Mbappe play in England, but I had this fantasy of seeing him play for Liverpool, and I'm not a Liverpool fan, but I thought, my goodness, imagine Mbappe playing with Diaz and Mane and Salah and Jota and Firmino. My goodness, that would be absolutely insane.
Klopp has been trying to play it down this week.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's whatever happens anyway, it's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. But what is also wonderful to see is that Karim Benzema is at long last given the recognition that I think the player fully deserves, regardless of the harsher judgment that some might have on what he's done in the past, and which was not perhaps the things he should have done. But put this aside if you can, and what you have is one of the most complete players, who's never been sent off, by the way, whom you'll never see disputing a referee decision. Honestly, he never has in his life. He's a different type of player. He's one of the most intelligent players there is. The way he moves on the pitch. I mean, I could carry on. You'll have to stop me at some point. But
it's a true love affair.
Well, it's all. I was watching the way he was moving on the pitch against Chelsea. And I was thinking there were moments he was just walking. He was walking like Messi, which is like really walking, not very fast. And then suddenly there would be this acceleration, and then suddenly he would make an effort and he would do a run, and he would go back and grab the ball in his own half, and just give the ball back. And you think, okay, what's he done? Well, what's he done is basically he's given space, he's offered an angle of passing, blah, blah, what he needed to do. And then the next thing you know, 5 seconds later, is in the 30 yards, threatening to score a goal. It's somebody who's got such an extraordinary intelligence of understanding of what is happening on the pitch. And you can see, I think you will have seen those incredible statistics since the beginning of March. And the games that he's played with Real Madrid and the games he wasn't there, he missed one game, which is the one they lost 4-0 against Barcelona. Every other game, he scored a double or a hat-trick. That's Karim Benzema for you.
We'll leave it there. Philippe, always a pleasure.
My pleasure too.
Philippe Auclair there. If you missed any of that, you can listen back on podcast. All our football coverage is brought to you by Sky. Don't miss Villa against Spurs on Saturday Night Football. It's live only on Sky Sports.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Get more of the sports you love on Sports Extra with BT Sport and Premier Sports.